everyone, I'm Eleanor Gibson, US editor of Design magazine, Architecture and Design magazine, and I'm here today to chat with Edie Archibong, and we're going to have a nice conversation at the end. We're going to open up for some audience questions, so keep thinking while we're chatting, basically. So, Edie, could you just start in telling me a bit about yourself and how you came to where you are now?
Hi, I'm Edie. Nice to meet you all. How did I get here? I guess it wasn't like a very direct path to becoming a designer. I grew up in a very academic household, and I started off in going to study business, and then, quickly realized that my passion lay in the creative field, the creative realms. I didn't know that being a designer was a profession that I could have. But I knew that I'd been cultivating my creative skills and that there had to be a way for me to use them in a way to benefit others. So initially I went into architecture, and then that led to me focusing on the experience within the architectural spaces, which led to designing furniture to go in the spaces. And it was really in that process that I started to fall in love with the making process and the immediacy that comes from designing something and being able to create it right in front of you, as opposed to creating miniature models and hoping that you can get a piece of architecture made. So, in long story quite short, I went to Art Center College of Design and studied environment design, got into furniture, moved on to smaller objects. And then when I did my master's in luxury in Switzerland, that was when I started to get into things like watches and creating more collectible design.
And so you studied architecture. I was wondering, does any of that experience play into how you design today?
I think for me, the important thing about architecture was really a way of thinking, an approach, and an understanding of process. It also was the first time that I went from imagining things and then drawing things in a way that was, I guess you could say, real. When you're sketching and things like that, there's a lot of illusion that goes into that. But when you get into drawing blueprints, you're drawing real things. So every line represents, the boundary of a real object. So learning how to see and dissect spaces and architectural elements allowed me to develop a way of thinking that allows me to design, industrial objects as well.
Great. And you've worked with some really diverse brands, luxury brands. I wondered, what is your process like when you get a brief? How do you begin that project? Yeah.
So I think something that's really important that doesn't really get spoken about very often when we talk about design of objects is the importance of the brand and the identity of the brand speaking through the objects that we design. So usually the first thing that I do is doing a deep dive into the brand that I'm working for and trying to figure out how the object that I'm going to create for them can stand as a living symbol for the ethos that's behind the brand. I guess the Hermès watch is an example of doing that. Rather than thinking about what kind of watch would be nice for them to sell, my goal was to create a watch that was a full embodiment of everything that I knew to be at the core of the brand. So that's usually the first thing that I do. The next thing I do is I take a look at what they're asking me for, and I try to determine if they know themselves what they should be asking for and if I need to have that conversation or not.
Great. And you grew up in LA, and I was lucky enough to chat with you for a bit before this talk, and you were saying that you weren't really exposed to design through your family. So I was wondering how you became interested in it and how you got to know more about what you wanted to do.
Yeah. Like I said, I didn't know that design was a profession, honestly. It never crossed my mind that there were people that were designing all the chairs and all these things that it seems obvious that was going on. But funnily enough, when around the same time that I started getting exposed to art just on the street, from seeing all the graffiti around LA, if you're in LA, you live in a car basically, and you're always seeing graffiti on the freeways, and that was really my exposure to artistic thinking. And then around that same time, I started toying around with really primitive software for 3D modeling and playing with the early versions of Photoshop back in like 1994, 95. And I didn't realize that I was using design tools. It was just a hobby that I maintained. So I think that was the beginning of me designing things, even though I didn't know that I was designing things. And by the time I went to design school and they started teaching us these tools, I had already been doing it, for well over a decade. And it was like a skill set that I had been developing just because I was interested in it. And again, back to the question of why, like how I became a designer, it was really me reflecting on the fact that there are certain things that I'd been drawn to or inclined to that I had always done that I had been ignoring in order to try to find a profession, that suited everyone else rather than thinking about what came naturally to me.
And can you tell me a bit about your first project? Because I know you had a table that you did a project with Bernhardt Design, and that kind of kick-started your career, and I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about that.
Yeah. The first piece of industrial design was an office table for Bernhardt, and that was part of a class that Bernhardt sponsored at Art Center, where they would students would apply to be part of the class. They would select a certain number of students, and we would be given the brief, and they would say whichever project is selected by the end has a chance to go into production. So, it was before that I was doing almost exclusively architectural projects. So this is the first time I was trying to do something at this scale. And you probably noticed the one thing that's really different, I guess, about this task table is just the sculptural leg. I mean, at the end of the day, when we got the brief, I realized that a lot of the tables that they had already functioned really well as task tables. So instead of reinventing the wheel, I took their best-selling table, took it apart, and then sculpted the table leg and cast it in aluminum and built a prototype for them. And, through the process of doing that was what made me fall in love with designing furniture, because it was the first time that I was, working at a one-to-one scale, sanding that table leg, and really getting into the dynamics of the surfaces and how light was reflecting off of these things, and at a one-to-one scale, which is very different than when you're working on architecture. And from that moment, I fell in love with the process of designing and making furniture.
Great. So then you started designing a bit more, and then I know you moved to Singapore for a bit. Can you tell me a bit more about that time?
Yeah. So I feel like this is kind of uninteresting, but we'll have to shorten it a bit. But more or less, what happened was that table did really well and still sells pretty well, and it put me on the radar of Jerry Helling, who's the head of Bernhardt Design, and it started me on the trajectory of being a furniture designer. But I was still doing internships with a company called 8 Inc., doing mostly architecture. So when I finally graduated, I had a couple of contracts already under my belt with Bernhardt and Cumberland, and I moved to Singapore to work for 8 Inc. while doing my furniture on the side. So, again, I don't look at any of the decisions I made as necessarily missteps. I think everything happened for a reason. And one of the major things for me about moving to Singapore was I was again put in a position where I realized I was doing things that didn't necessarily align with my true inner self, but were really based on me trying to imagine myself within, the framework of what everyone else saw to be normal. deep down I wanted to make, really weird tables with glass legs, but that's not a practical thing to do at the stage that I was in. So I did what I thought people would want me to do, and I took the job and I moved to Singapore. After a few years of working for 8 Inc. and learning quite a bit, I decided that I wanted to really pursue my desire to make things that had more of spiritual power than the innovation and technology-based industrial design that I was doing. And that was when I decided to enter the luxury realm, and I moved to Switzerland.
You often talk about spirituality and how that plays into your design. Can you explain how that works and how spirituality is a reference for you?
No, I can't explain how it works. It's really weird. But I guess what I can say is that I understand that because of the way I talk about my approach and what is behind my pieces, that there is a sense that spirituality is like a major, like a harnessed part of my process, but it's exactly the opposite. It's like the process of inspiration, I think, is a spiritual thing no matter what. And I think anybody that's a creative goes through that process. I don't think that it's anything exceptional that I'm using spirituality as my inspiration or as, the jumping off point. I think it's just the fact that I'm paying attention to where these things are coming from and why, and asking the questions, and also having the intent to create a more spiritually uplifting world for people to exist in with the things I create. I think everything around us has a spiritual power and energy, and if you pay attention, then you can create things with intention to be positive and uplifting in a spiritual manner. And I think that's more so what I do, more than necessarily using spirituality as part of my design process. Honestly, at the end of the day, and I believe this to be true for most people, or maybe I'm really weird, I have no idea where my ideas come from. I could be going for a walk and then I see a weird, colorful chandelier in my head and I make it, So where does that come from? It comes from somewhere. It comes from the ether. It comes from God. It comes from the universe. Wherever it comes from, it's an intangible, and to me, that's a spiritual thing.
So you said that when you started working for luxury brands, that gave you the opportunity to explore this idea of spirituality. I wonder, is there a way that can be accessible for anyone through any price point in terms of design pieces? Like, what really qualifies that?
Well, one thing that I really want to make clear is that luxury doesn't mean expensive. Luxury, when you think about what luxury means, by definition, it kind of means not necessary, I don't believe that, but I think that what it's really pointing toward is the fact that within luxury, a key performance indicator is how it makes you feel. It's not whether it's the most efficient table or if it's the most effective time-telling mechanism. It's really about how it touches your soul. And there is a sense that is not a function, and then it becomes considered a luxury to be able to have things that make you feel really good inside. And I think that these things are already accessible to anyone. Now, working with luxury brands is a different thing, because their price points, or at least the ones that I prefer to work with, they're not necessarily just like inflated numbers. It's coming from the sense that in order to craft something by hand to the exacting standards and quality that they're trying to make it to, it carries that kind of a price, because we're comparing it to objects that are mass-produced in a way in which efficiency and cost-effectiveness is valued more than the ethereal quality of the object. So I think that my hope would be that there would be, in the future, more tendency or appreciation from consumers towards handcrafted objects and objects that feel special rather than objects that are just less expensive or disposable. Because in the end, even though an object might cost more money, if you're actually if you're doing it properly, you're buying something that you're never going to throw away, so it's kind of worth that price.
Do you think that it would be difficult now if you were starting your career again in this kind of world where the big brands are able to sell cheap furniture that people can buy really quickly? How do you see that challenging like emerging designers today? And what would your advice be?
I don't think it's so dire. I think that everything has its place. I do think, and this is my personal opinion, things that last, that's my approach to sustainability, is making things that you don't throw away, like not making things for the landfill. In order to do that, you have to make things that are going to last. And you also have to make things, again, that touch people's soul rather than their attraction to it being based on its cost effectiveness. Like, this is the cheapest sofa that I can get that fills the amount of space I want to fill. If that's the approach, it would be really easy to let go of that thing, and it ends up in a landfill. So I guess my advice to young designers now is the same that it would have been 10 years ago, is figure out who you are before you start making things, so that you're putting something special into the things that you make, so that anybody that connects with an object that you've designed is going to have some connection to it that goes beyond just its use value. And at that stage, you're creating special connections with people, and those things are going to be more expensive, but I think that the consumer will pretty soon catch up to the value in that. I would hope.
Yeah, I mean, today there's a lot of concern about sustainability and making things more sustainable. And do you think you talked about it then, but how will that impact eventually the design industry and how we consume design?
I don't know.
Good answer.
I'm like the worst person for that conversation. I don't. It's not that I design in a vacuum, but I kind of design in a vacuum. I'm not reading all the most recent opinions about these things. The last time I really was thinking about sustainability was, Cradle to Cradle. I read Cradle to Cradle, and I met Bill McDonough, and talked to him, and what he was saying made so much sense. And this must have been 2006. It's like, that was 14 years ago, right? It made so much sense. And then just watching how it's just not implemented, I don't know, it made me stop thinking about sustainability in terms of greenness so much, and really just focus on the real core of who I am and how I can be sustainable with what I do. And my way of doing that was getting away from technology and hardcore industrial design and getting more into luxury and things that people keep and things that last and things that I could basically guarantee are going to be made in a way that they're not going to fall apart and they're going to be good products. And using noble materials and having things made by hand and not making too many of things is my approach. It's what I can do, I feel like. But I don't really have any hot takes on or catchphrases about sustainability or green life or any of that stuff. Sorry.
So you say you design in a vacuum, but is there anyone in the industry that you admire, whose work you're interested in? Or if not particularly in this industry, is there someone or work that you're interested in?
Yeah, that was kind of a joke. I'm not in a vacuum, but when I say that, I do mean that I'm not the type of designer that has subscriptions to all the magazines and knows what all the newest stuff is. I also live in a really small village, so I don't see a lot of stuff. But I have, the designers that I've looked up to have remained mostly the same. Like I always looked up to Mark Newson for his, like, from a business standpoint, his ability to transcend kind of the limits of, genres. Buckminster Fuller. I mean, I'm really boring.
Classic.
I'm not up on like a lot of like super new stuff. I'd have to think about it, but I mean, obviously, I like glass. So like, there's Sabina Marcellus, is amazing, and German's Hermès. I see the stuff that I see usually is, I guess, in Milan, and yeah, I guess not a lot of design that I look at a lot. I spend a lot of time in museums and galleries, and like next to the lake.
Great. And so what's next for you? Do you see yourself going back into architecture? What will your next move be?
I have no idea what the next move will be. I do plan to. I mean, everything that I've done has been part of my ultimate goal to create really special spaces and environments within which people to have spiritually uplifting experiences. That's always been the goal. The process of starting from the outside of a building to thinking about the experience inside the building, to recognizing that the practice of architecture is about the effective management of the movement of light and sound in a space and how that energy affects the people occupying the space, the things that we learned from like the Gothic cathedrals so long ago that like still could be put into practice, but we tend to just make rectangles. All of these things like that were important to me back then remain important, and I feel like I've been going through a journey of developing my sensitivity of the different scales of experience that people have when they're occupying a space. So learning how to design furniture was a necessary process, I feel like, in order for me to be good at designing spaces and designing architecture. Learning how to design a watch gave me an understanding of the sensitivity that people have when they touch something and experience it with like their skin as opposed to with their body. Or with architecture, you experience it with your eyes, and if an effective understanding of all of these different scales of experience make it so that you can make a much more enriching architectural space or interior space. So all of that to say, yeah, I hope that one day I will get back into architecture and spaces, probably, hopefully, spiritual spaces. I think I would probably want to focus on non-denominational temples or people's homes.
Great. And you have the recent exhibit, the Speechless exhibit, which is the project you worked on there was really interesting. I wonder if you could tell me a bit about that brief and then the project that you developed.
Yeah. Do we have a picture of it? I think it's like it just passed. Yeah, it'll be hard to talk about without the picture, but it's this Speechless exhibit is ongoing at the Dallas Museum of Art, and it started because the curator heard from the owner of the gallery that I'm with that I had synesthesia, which I don't. So she approached me and asked me about my synesthesia, and I told her, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't have synesthesia. I think there are people out there that really taste colors, and I don't. But that conversation led to me talking about some very real experiences that I do have, which people, I think, mistake for synesthesia that I think everybody has, which is the connection that we have between energy and frequencies that manifest themselves in different ways, whether it's color or sound or whatever it is. When you feel, how certain colors make you feel, and you also know how sounds make you feel. So there's certain colors and sounds that make you feel the same way. My process changes all the time. At the time when I met her, that was when I was still in a process of making music instead of sketching. And I would think about, like when I would be thinking about a concept, sometimes the most effective way for me to express the idea or the energy behind the idea would be to compose a piece of music and then have that music playing as my mind went through the process of developing the form that would accompany that music. So like a lot of these chandeliers have, 6 or 7 songs that were composed during the process of making it. So in that sense, the colors and the sounds all related to me in a specific way. And I started trying to figure out how I can give someone else that experience of touching sound or like hearing light. And that's how the Speechless exhibit came up. Hopefully the picture comes up soon. But at the end of the day, what we did was we built a space called the Oracle, which is kind of like a temple experience. And within the space, we have 11 sculptures. That's it right there. And a pool. And as you move the sculptures, the lighting inside the sculptures change, and it affects the sound of the entire space. And the large one in the center controls the vibration underneath the pool that creates different standing patterns using cymatics. And in the end, what it created is it created an experience that as soon as you touch a piece of their crystal, like as soon as you touch the crystal and you move it, you get an immediate reaction in the entire space. And all the people that are occupying the space at any given moment are creating a symphony that it becomes a shared experience. And we called it the Oracle because it's, from a spiritual standpoint, if you enter with a question that you ask the Oracle, it's going to give you an answer when you touch an object, but you're going to have to decipher what it means on your own. It's not going to be direct, and that's the way that an oracle works. So, yeah, it was a great adventure to do that. It was very difficult. We had to build a modular synthesizer from scratch, figure out all the engineering to make it all work seamlessly without you being able to see what's going on. And so far, people have reacted well to it.
Great. So I would say, like, last year, you really it was kind of the year you seem to be coming up everywhere, and you must be now inundated with offers for projects. What makes you say yes to something and no, and how do you make that decision?
I try to say no to as much as possible, honestly. I don't know. I don't. How to say this? My decision to this hasn't been like an easy journey, and it started like it's 2020. Started like 15 years ago, So I'm not really doing this to try to make the most amount of objects or work with the most amount of clients or, like have a list of the most prestigious logos on my website. For me, it really is about a spiritual journey that I'm on to try to be as much benefit to as many people as possible with the skills that I was born with. So it actually makes it really easy to know which projects to say yes or no to. Like as soon as an offer comes, it's really clear whether or not it's going to be an area where I can lend my skills in a way that it's going to be spiritually uplifting to whoever comes in contact with the end result. And that's how I decide. I don't have a studio. I work alone. So I do have to be really careful. I don't get enough sleep. But so I try to say no as much as possible. And I'm also, again, with the sustainability approach, I try to make sure that the clients that I'm working with are legacy clients. I mean, it's also good for business at the end of the day to work with clients that have an intention and the hope to have products designed by me that they can, like, produce for a really long time. So staying close to companies like Hermès and continuing to work with them. I'm going to be launching a collection with Knoll this year, and keeping my client base small so that I can manage it. That's basically how I deal with things. So I'm not, I don't have like a lot of new clients and stuff like that, and I'm not looking to expand into a huge studio.
Great, thank you. I think that's a good point for us to stop and open up to the audience if anyone has any questions. We have one there.
You mentioned a little bit at the beginning about designing for a brand and how your first step is to do a deep dive of research into the brand's identity. Do you also get to inject a little bit of your own identity into whatever it is that you're designing? And is there a right and wrong way to do that?
That's a great question. I'll start at the end. I don't believe in right or wrong. I think it's a delusion. I think that I believe in efficient and inefficient. But, and then back to the original. Yeah, I feel like my identity is within all of the objects that I'm creating, and it's back to the point of how to select clients. I only work with clients that we have an overlap, where we have a shared identity, so that I don't have to compromise my identity in order to match theirs. So for me, part of the deep dive is figuring out. Do you know about the monomyth from Joseph Campbell? So I tend to put things through that filter to determine if this is a mythological story and myself and the brand are characters in the story. Who are we and what's our relation to each other? That's usually how I find where we overlap and where we have a common goal and where I can make something that works for both of us. And sometimes, like with Hermès, for example, I go in there and, they're Yoda, or, and other times I'll go into a brand and I'll look at them and I'll say, well, you're obviously Luke Skywalker and I'm here to be Obi-Wan. And then it kind of puts it in a way where it becomes clear where I can design something that is in line with them and also has a piece of me that makes sense. It might be weird.
Any other questions?
I think there's one over there.
The red.
Turn it on. Oh, I like the way you think. First of all.
Thank you.
Secondly, I was wondering, because your exhibit that you have, the Oracle. I have a friend who's into shamanism, and she has these bowls. I guess they're crystal. I'm not sure. She has. I don't know. I don't understand the whole concept. I have to refer back to her, but. She can take something and ring it around the bowl. Is that the same sort of thing that might have, are you into that same sort of, that helped you get into the Oracle?
Yes and no.
Because
so there is, yes, there is a relation. The way that those bowls work is based on finding a resonant frequency and vibration. So there is a lot of those ideas that I have studied or that I've connection to that find their way into my work, but usually there's not usually a direct thing. It's almost like all of those things and my friends that are healers as well, and all the things that I've learned from them and all the things that I've studied in my own spiritual journey. It's almost like those are all the ingredients that I put into a gumbo and just start cooking it, and you can smell when it's ready, and then that's what the end product is. And you never know when you're pouring out a bowl of it which elements are going to end up in each bowl, but there's a piece of everything in everything at the end of the day. So yes, there is a connection. It's not necessarily a direct one, but just the idea that vibrational frequencies have the ability to have a healing effect on us based on the capacity for vibration to change the physical matter around us, which was one of the reasons that I did the cymatic pool, because that's the best way to illustrate that vibration has the ability to create patterns within physical matter. And that's essentially what healing frequencies are meant to be doing.
There's another question just behind there.
So you mentioned that you write music before you actually do the art, or kind of design the process, or it's part of the process. Can we hear that music? I mean, I think that's a really powerful idea, that you could buy a piece and actually listen to the music. Because I feel like if that's part of your process, I feel like that's part of the piece as well.
Yeah. So, actually, I condensed the story of how I became a designer, but I was going to be a musician right when I was working at it. I was simultaneously learning architecture and making music. So music and design for me went hand in hand, because as I was learning design, I was also making music. Now, I made a decision when I pursued design as a career to keep my music for myself. It was an artistic expression that I didn't want to open up to the judgment of others. So, 17 years now of making music. I mean, I played instruments as a kid, but of recording music, all of that music is barely been shared with many people. There's probably an old SoundCloud that has some of my stuff when I was making like rap beats. But all of that said, the opening night of the Oracle was the first time that I did a live music performance, and 3 of us performed on the sculptures, about 15-minute live set of music using the sculptures. And we had an interpretive dancer also perform with us. And that was well received, and I think so that should be online soon. And that, combined with a couple of songs that were used in a Surface magazine interview, will be the first kind of public opportunity to listen to my music. The performance that we did with the Oracle was quite special and important to me, in the sense that it was the music that I've been trying to figure out how to make the entire time I've been making music. And what's special about it is that it's impossible to play the same thing twice, and the entire performance is about reacting to the other people playing the same instrument with you. So every time we do it is completely live and unrehearsable, and it can only be done once. So there's probably going to be in the future an opportunity to purchase one-time recordings of that, most likely through the gallery, and it might be really hard to get to, hopefully. More questions?
Question at the front here.
Okay, here goes. I want to ask what that thing is that looks like it's an alligator's mouth that's open that has teeth in it. Where? It's on the screen. It's one of your pieces.
Okay.
And it's a big, long oval, like cigar-shaped, and it looks like it's got
the ritual calendar.
Could you explain it? And
yeah, so that was interesting. That was for Holy Handmade in Milan in 2017. It's now at the Friedman Benda Gallery, and the ritual calendar started with the idea of mastery and the importance of ritual along the path to mastering anything, mastery of self, mastery of a technique. And the concept was to make a calendar. There's 31 pieces, and the idea was that the master stone craftsman would have his apprentice make one of those shapes every day and polish it perfectly smooth for an entire month. And each day that it was done, it would go inside the slot. Then the person who purchases the piece every day walks up and takes one of those pieces out and invests an intention into that piece and then puts it in their pocket or purse. And throughout the day, whatever they prayed on or whatever intention they put into it in the morning, they're reminded of it throughout the day. Whenever they reach in their pocket or they reach in their purse, and they go back to that moment. And it reminds them that every day they're taking one step closer to being a master. So those 31 pieces, you take one out and you put it back in at the end of the day, and you go through the month. And yeah, that was an important piece. Yeah, there's only one of those. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, completely made by hand in Verona. And yeah, that was an important piece for me because that was the first piece that I had the opportunity to do that could potentially be viewed as useless. Everything before that was like either a table or a lamp, but this was something that if somebody buys that, they're only getting it for spiritual purposes and not to have a dual use like much of the other stuff I do.
I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. No? Okay, well, thank you. You do? Okay.
Here you go. I just think it's really good, and I wonder what you think of it. I heard it on a radio years ago, and it's, as I remember it, it's some tribe somewhere unaffected by the modern world. And they think of, I mean, this is what I remember of it, right? But I think of it all the time. They always think of the future as not in front of them, but behind them, because they can't see it. Whereas, the past is in front of them because they've seen it. I mean, it's an interesting way of thinking, isn't it? I guess it reminds me of the way you're sort of attempting to think and how you go about things.
I mean, I have an interesting relationship with the past and the future. I think they're both delusional because the only thing that's real is right now. But any memories you have of the past is somehow distorted because it's not actually what happened. And then any projection of the future is completely delusional because you have no idea what's going to happen. But that is an interesting way to think of it. I also think that it's important to dive headfirst into our delusion. We're like the only thing in existence that has the capacity for delusion. And we can act against our own self-interest, which is strange, right? Anyway.
Great. Thank you, Innie, and thank you, everyone, for coming today.